This podcast is brought to you thanks to the generous support of Whistler Blackcomb, leaders in delivering adventure.
Now, if you've gotten to a place where all of a sudden that fear paralysis sets in, maybe as a coach or a guide, you didn't expect it, you didn't see it coming, it came on you without any of the red flags that you might normally get, and like you said, you're in it now. You got to deal with it and help them manage it. So yeah, those are kind of, to me, like just the tone gets pretty soft. The instructions are really clear and really simple.
Welcome to Delivering Adventure. This is the podcast that explores what it really takes to share adventure like a pro, with your friends, your family, and as a profession. My name is Chris Capio, and I'm coming to you from Whistler, British Columbia.
And I'm Jordy Shepard, recording from Canmore, Alberta. After a lifetime of working extensively in different parts of the adventure guiding industry, Chris and I have teamed up to launch this podcast. In each episode, you will hear top adventure guides, managers, marketers, and athletes share their best stories, advice, and trade secrets. The goal of this podcast is to share how you can take yourself and others farther from the mountains to the office and beyond. It doesn't matter what a person's risk tolerance level is or how good they are at what they're doing. If you expose them to enough danger, there's a very good chance they're going to move into their survival zone. This is the point where their survival instincts can take over and their performance level drops. If people feel pushed too far, or they perceive that danger is too great, they can end up right at the top of their survival zone, where they become incapacitated to the level that they start to lose control of the situation. This is when they can find themselves in the middle of a crisis. This is something we examined with AJ Maho earlier this season. Now, we often think of high-risk situations as places where we might be skiing, climbing, or mountain biking where we can't fall. However, a beginner skier or snowboarder might find themselves in this place on what we may think of as easy terrain. You can also find someone who is terrified of water, canoeing, kayaking, or rafting in a relatively low-risk situation. As we have discussed in past episodes, risk can be subjective. That said, dealing with perceived risk can pose just as many challenges for a leader as real risk. This means that being able to coach someone through danger, whether it is real or perceived, is an essential skill when it comes to delivering adventure. This includes being able to coach ourselves as we are subject to the same processes as others.
Helping us to explore how we can coach ourselves and others more effectively through situations where we are faced with danger is Derek Foose. Derek is the founder and head coach of the Whistler Freeride Club and guides and works as a staff trainer for Extremely Canadian. Derek is also a course conductor and course developer for the Professional Ski Instructors of Canada's Big Mountain Pathway. In addition to coaching and guiding, Derek has tapped into his extensive experience as a broadcast host for the Freeride World Tour. He's on the board of directors coaches chair for the International Free Skiers and Snowboarders Association. And if that isn't enough, Derek also co-hosts the Freeride Guide podcast. We have posted all of these links in the show notes. Jordy, as a climbing and ski guide and mountain rescue specialist, have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had a challenging time coaching someone through danger?
Yeah, Chris, this has been a pretty common theme while guiding and also doing rescue work. I'll talk a bit about a rescue event. I actually wasn't working as specifically a rescuer at the time. I was managing a heli ski operation near Revelstoke, and we got called to the near neighbor cat skiing operation, and they had been out with their lead guide and cat driver in an empty snowcat. Fortunately, no guests in it. But they had triggered from the bottom of a gully that they were driving up, doing some road building and terrain exploring. Driving the cat up, they had triggered a size 3 out of 5 avalanche, so quite a large avalanche that had come down the sidewall of the gully as they were driving up. It pushed the snowcat back, probably 50, 60 meters, and buried right over the snowcat for the front of it, and really only the back of the snowcat was sticking out of the snow, which they didn't know because they were inside the snowcat cab. The windshield had been pushed in by the avalanche, and the snow had come in and piled up to basically to their shoulders. And so they were encased in snow couldn't turn the cat off, couldn't get to any of the controls or the radio in the snowcat. But they did have a radio in one of their chest pockets, and they were able to hit their dispatch and call out for help. And so we got called, we dropped our guests off and headed over as being the closest folks with a helicopter to them. When we got there, we saw the situation was a snowcat running, mostly buried in an avalanche, just the tail end, the guest box end of it, the door sticking out. And so we left one of the three of us to be a safety person in case another avalanche came down, because the other side of the gully had not released. And two of us went down with shovels to dig them out and see how it was going. And this was probably an hour after they'd called out for help, maybe even longer. And so we dug down to them, and they were alive, which was actually kind of surprising. And we dug them out, got them out the window of the snowcat, and we were trying to move them off the slope. And they were in shock and cold, but they were also concerned about the snowcat, and having to come back and deal with it running out of diesel and reprime it and the whole shoveling out of it. But there was really nothing to be done there. But they were quite focused on, we've got to do something here and get this snowcat dealt with. And I just had to. It was partly coaching and partly being quite directive, saying we need to leave, and they make new snowcats every day, and you can come back and deal with this another day.
Wow, Jordy, that is a crazy story. That definitely qualifies as coaching someone through danger. Just a quick reminder before we bring in Derek, if you haven't already done so, make sure you click the follow button in your podcast player or subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you don't miss out on future episodes. All right, let's bring in Derek Foose. All right, Derek, welcome to Delivering Adventure. Where are you now?
I am sitting in my kitchen in Whistler, BC, in Rainbow, and enjoying a nice little sunny day. Got a bit of downtime after a pretty long winter.
Awesome. Well, I'm just in the southern part of Whistler, and of course, Jordy is coming to us from Canmore today. So, can you tell us about your path into the adventure industry?
Yeah, I'd say it's a bit of an all over the place scenario. I grew up in Edmonton, grew up ski racing and spending a lot of the weekends in Banff and Jasper and just in the interior of BC with my dad. He kind of got into skiing as I got into ski racing, so he was like a passionate adult learner. And so was all over going to the mountains, every weekend when I was a kid, and did a year of university after high school at the U of A, University of Alberta. Decided that whatever I was doing was not really leading towards anything useful. So a year off and checking out Whistler back in 1995. And yeah, I mean, I fell in love with the place immediately, and it wasn't even a good season. Like the 95, 96 winter was pretty shit. A lot of rain, not that much snow, but the terrain, the expanse of the resort, I'd never been anywhere as big as Whistler, and Whistler in the 90s definitely was a little bit more, just a little looser, a little wilder, a little bit more exploratory. There weren't that many people skiing in the Alpine, in the steeps, and there was nothing in the ski school in terms of like training or anything. So it was like, figure it out, climb into things, climb out of things, fall off of things. And I do look back on that with a little bit of like wistfulness in the way that the path into learning what's going on and where you're going is pretty nerfed these days. Like there's not a lot of opportunity for people to make mistakes. You just get handed all the information. And but anyway, yeah, so I was teaching skiing in the Whistler Blackcomb, or I guess the Whistler Mountain Ski School, working with kids, and then spending all my spare time ski touring, light mountaineering, trying to ski everything in sight. and jumping off everything in sight. And that kind of passion in conjunction with teaching seemed to merge together at a perfect opportune time for me to form the Whistler Freeride Club in 2001. I was coaching ski racing, and I was getting in trouble constantly for not showing up at what we were supposed to be doing, because I was taking the kids to ski the peak chair and spankies and not do like slip the snow off the slalom course. And the kids that I was working with that were in my group were super stoked on it. And I kind of, yeah, it was just this like friction, constant friction of like, why weren't you there? I was like, well, who cares? It snowed. Anyway. So I came with a proposal to the ski school and said, I think there's a place for what I'm doing, because these kids are loving it. And the kids that are passing on through this program and going on to the next phase of racing, a lot of them at around 14 years old are quitting skiing completely because they're just burnt out on it. And being, and I still feel this way, being from the prairies and coming here as like my dream come true, looking at these kids who had this incredible skill set and lived here and grew up here and hated skiing, I was like, that's like, what is that? How could that even be possible? So I was like, there's got to be something we can do to keep those kids engaged. So that's where I went to them with a proposal, a half-baked at best proposal, because I was about 21, maybe 22. But they were like, yeah, I guess if you have a whole group of kids and they're willing to sign up and do it, let's give it a shot if you think it's going somewhere. So now we have 160 kids in the Whistler Freeride Club. There's freeride clubs at pretty much every resort that has even a little bit of good terrain. There is a junior series in North America that has 100 events across the series. There's 20 of them in South America. 5,000 athletes across, just North and South America, another probably 1,500 in Europe, Japan, and New Zealand. So it's really turned into a global phenomenon. And that was in combination with working with Peter and Jill Smart at Extremely Canadian, which again was just an outlet at exactly the right time to do a job that also allowed me to do the exact thing that I loved. Because I just never really had a passion for like blue run groomed skiing. That's not what fills my bucket. And so to be able to find these two outlets for the exact kind of thing that I love, and then to be able to share that with other people was magic. So that was kind of where I landed in the middle of it.
Today, we're exploring the topic of how we can coach people through high risk or dangerous situations. Can you think of a time when you were faced with a situation where you had a challenging time coaching someone through a high risk or dangerous situation?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's always challenging in different directions, or for different reasons. The balance between somebody who wants to be challenged, somebody who doesn't want to be challenged, somebody who wants to be challenged more than they maybe should be. There's a lot of kind of reading of social cues, of understanding what the challenge zone for somebody even is or should look like. And I mean, between skiing and biking, with me, I'm putting people in some like questionable situations a lot of the time. Not questionable whether they should be in them, but just consequential situations a lot of the time. And I'm pretty proud of the like overall safety record of the number of people that don't get hurt, that do exciting and fun stuff and stay like engaged in what they're doing. But with kids, it's especially difficult because there's a lot of the time this underlying pressure that whether real or imagined, it's there to perform at a level because somebody else has done it or somebody you look up to has done it. And whether it's skiing down something or jumping off something, I guess I'll use jumping off something in this one because it's often really situation dependent. Kids will have these really specific terrain goals. I want to drop this cliff and I want to do it today. And if it hasn't snowed or the wind's blown from the wrong direction, or, they just didn't have the right sleep or the right breakfast or aren't wearing the right colored pants or whatever, all the things that can go into making a decision for something like that. But there's all of that then you come up against a wall of fear that is delicate to try to either push through or push out of the way. Because fear is it's a complicated emotion. And I think, without being a psychologist, typically it's there for a self-preservation factor. You're afraid of something because there's some risk there. And that's the delicate little band where the fun sits, right? We're going to be a little bit scared or scared enough that when you are able to push through that fear, you're able to accomplish something that feels really good. But there is an amount of it where you can't. And so, on my side, it's been a 25-year long experiment of how hard can you push? Which direction do you push from? What are the tools that you can use to convince somebody? And is convincing somebody the right direction to come from? Or is it just allowing them to convince themselves? Because if you talk somebody into doing something and then it doesn't work out, and I'll for sure have had those instances, that's on you. Like, they're putting their faith in us as coaches or guides or instructors to help them make good decisions that are going to have at least the high percentage chance of a good outcome. So if you use your like all your tools and talk somebody into doing something and then they blow it, or they just, it just doesn't happen. And they are either, whether it's injured or even just like it didn't work and they're feeling a little sore, like, cause there's a pretty big variety, when you eat shit, if you're actually injured or if you're just hurt right now, or maybe you're just embarrassed. But all of those things come back on the coach as the one who's making the decision. So yeah, it's a tricky one for sure. And I talked a lot and didn't give you any specific example there, but dug into it a little bit.
You're bang on. I think one of the keys with professionals and experienced coaches is that ability to recognize when somebody can do something and when somebody, it's just not going to work for them. I was watching this girl on one of the green slopes on Blackcomb a few years ago, and she was there with her parents. She's probably, I don't know, 13. And I was slowly working my way down. I noticed that she would just make a turn, she'd crash, make a turn, she'd crash, she'd bail out near the start of the turn. This was just not happening. And she'd gone probably, 4/5 of the way down. So this is a long run. She's getting tired. And I just pulled up and I said, listen, just take your skis off and walk down to the chair. And that was it. And my guests, after we left and we stopped, my guests were like, wow, that was a really good call for you to not just show up and say, hey, put your skis back on, you can do this. Because that person, and they had noticed, this girl was not going to do it. She was not going to make that work. And if I were her coach, obviously I probably wouldn't have put her in that situation to begin with. But if you put her in a situation where she doesn't make that turn and she ends up, off the run or in a ditch or in the trees, then like you said, that's on you, right? And so having that ability to look at people and say, yeah, you know what, you're not doing that. We're not going to put you in that situation. Now, when you're coaching people in these difficult situations, whether it's mountain biking or skiing or any other sports, what do you think is going through their minds and what's going through your minds in that moment where, they're about to drop that cliff or ride down that steep slope that's pushing them, to the edge of their challenge zone and maybe even above it?
I mean, It, usually, if it's something that's consequential, the lead up to it has been pretty comprehensive, in terms of using the skill, practicing the skill in places where it's not consequential, so that the the consistency in execution is going to build confidence that it's going to execute, or you're going to execute in a way that you have done up to this point, and then the outcome is going to be the same. So the hope is that there's a confidence from consistency. If there is consequence to doing something, this is just speaking for myself and my own coaching. I'm using quite a long lead up of skill acquisition and development, and before we get to something. And the bike park is a good example of that, because there's a number of features where, especially jumps and drops, if you are short, you're getting hurt. There's no two ways about it. That's just what's going to happen, because it's a big gap or it's a long way up. So it's something where, from a coach and an athlete or client and instructor standpoint, you got to build this trust that goes both ways. The person needs to trust me that I'm going to help guide them into a decision that is going to lead to a good outcome, and I need to trust them that they're going to do the things I ask them to in order to secure that good outcome. And often that trust relationship doesn't have a long time to develop. So we all come up with our little hacks and shortcuts to get to know people, but a lot of it is just being personable and talking to people, asking the right questions, letting them talk. You can get a lot of information from letting people tell you what their goals are, and how they have been approaching getting there. Again, in the bike world, there's people who are following a really slow and gentle progression, and there's people who are on a much steeper progression curve. And typically the injuries are the obvious sign that somebody's progression curve is probably a little bit too steep, because the results on a bike are aggressive. If things don't go right, you're not messing around with snow, it's rocks and dirt, and it's hard and it hurts every time. So somebody's like, oh yeah, I've broken my collarbone this many times, and I did this and have this many concussions. It gives you some fodder to help make decisions of maybe you can pull back the brakes, or pull on the brakes a little bit, and develop some skills. Because with biking, maybe more even than skiing, if you just are willing to not brake, you can get away with a lot. Like, your bike will roll through stuff, it'll fly off stuff pretty well for the most part. Obviously things come apart when they come apart quick. But yeah, you can get way beyond your skill level really quickly. So for me, it's about developing that trust. And then I think in the moment, people are thinking, I hope people are thinking, this is going to work. Like, I've put the work in. I've got a routine that I've given myself to get myself in a mental state where I'm going to execute properly, and to a full level of commitment. We were chatting before about, like, you don't try a backflip, you do it. And if you try it, you'll probably get hurt, because that commitment level is not going to be there, and then the execution is going to be half, and half a backflip is not good. So yeah, I think that kind of confidence in the process that you've traveled to get to that point where you're now putting yourself in a situation where this needs to go right, or I'm not going to be okay. Having the confidence in what you did to get yourself there is everything. And if you don't have that confidence, then you probably haven't put the work in.
Yeah, you're totally right. Sort of the impetus for me to explore this topic was, I was on a training session a few years ago at the start of the season, and the trainer with a group of ski instructors had them at the top of a blue run, and it's a bit steeper. And the scenario was that you had a green skier who had never done anything that steep, how would you manage this? And, standing there looking down there, you could, you could, based on my experience, what's going on in that person's head is they're probably looking 3, 4, 5 turns down the hill, imagining themselves not being able to do it. And now when they go to make that first turn, instead of focusing on what they're doing on that first turn, if you just left them to their own uh, design, they're probably going to make a mistake, or there's a way higher chance of them making a mistake because they're imagining themselves failing as opposed to succeeding. And so keeping them focused in that moment on like you said, yes, I can do this, I can make this work. And to your point, this whole process, it starts way before you get to that point, right? It's going through what is going to happen, what you're going to do so that you can counter your instincts that might want to kick in, and you can get to that point where you can actually see yourself succeeding instead of letting the instincts come in. Like, my instinct on a bike when I'm stressed is to do exactly the opposite of what you suggested. It's to jam on the brakes, go slow, lean the wrong way. Instead of looking ahead, you're not looking as far. And then all of a sudden it just becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, exactly. And counter intuition is huge in this world. I see it in climbing and skiing, in mountain biking and surfing. The things that your brain is telling you to do often are going to result in it not going well at all. And braking in mountain biking is just a classic example of that. Like, you stop that wheel rolling and the house of cards falls down pretty quick. So yeah, it's just about building a bit of consistency in what you're going to do, consistency in your reactions to when things are getting a little wild in the moment. Cause that's part of what makes a lot of this fun, is that little bit, or a lot of the unknown factor. Is this gonna go my way? What do I have to do to make it happen? Or what are the external factors that I don't have control of? And how much am I gonna have to react? Anyway, all that stuff comes into it, and it keeps it exciting, and that's why it's fun. If it didn't have that factor, then yeah, it loses a lot of its shine for sure.
Yeah, and giving them certain things to focus on, and probably pretty minimal, that's going to help that success. So if you're skiing in the trees, telling people to look between the trees, not at the trees. Because if you're looking at the trees, you go where you're looking, and then you're hitting the trees.
Yeah, it's simple.
Just simple things like that, right? Like, yeah, keep your focus here, and then you won't notice the things that are flying past you that are kind of dangerous, and you'll make it through.
Yeah, for the most part.
And then the other thing, I think you've alluded to it, is that whole progression, right? Like stepping up to it and then taking steps back, and building that confidence, and then stepping a little further out of the comfort zone in a safe way, and then stepping it back. And before people know it, they've stepped a long ways forward.
Yeah, exactly. The consolidation of skills has to happen. If you're just constantly doing new and new and new and new, and you never consolidate any of it, then eventually that ends, with something going wrong, because you've gotten yourself beyond what you're actually, physically or sometimes mentally capable of.
Well, and it's not very fun either if you're consciously incompetent all the time.
Yeah.
You suck at it. You want to actually have some success and feel consciously competent. Like, yeah, I got this. And you have to do that by going forward and then stepping back a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's move forward with that to the point where somebody is faced with danger. And now for us as coaches, guides, instructors, what does our feedback need to be? Like, what does it actually sound like? So you are seeing this going down, it's right in front of you. And how do you deal with that? How do you speak to them? How do you communicate with them?
Well, yeah, exactly. That's a bit of a tricky one, because hopefully it was known from the get-go. But if it's something where maybe you've made a mistake, you've put somebody into terrain where they don't belong, and now it's on you to figure it out and help them get out of it. I think really simple communication, Uh, your tone is really important. I find the more risky the situation is, the softer I speak. I also get much closer to people, like physically closer. That proximity goes a long way to giving a sense of kind of wellness and well-being. Um, and there have definitely been times over my career where I've actually put like a hand on a ski boot. I'll put myself below somebody and put a hand on a boot, and then together we're going to move to, in a way to a result where you're going to be somewhere that's safer than where we are right now. If you've gotten to a place where all of a sudden that fear paralysis sets in, maybe as a coach or a guide, you didn't expect it, you didn't see it coming, it came on you without any of the red flags that you might normally get, and like you said, you're in it now. You got to deal with it, and help them manage it. So yeah, those are kind of, to me, like just the tone gets pretty soft. The instructions are really clear and really simple, and very much like just the thing now. We're not going into what's going to happen 3, 4, or 5 steps from now. We're just going to do this one thing, and I'm going to be with you, and we're going to do it together. And the proximity, I think, is probably the most important part. That real close conversation, like the physical presence that you can deliver to them to help them feel a little bit safer, a little bit more comfortable. And then just, we're never standing still. We're not just going to sit here and just be here. We're going to be moving towards what we need to get done now. We're not just going to, you know what I mean? Like, stop.
Take action.
Yeah, exactly. There's going to be decisive action, and it's going to be slow and methodical and quiet and calm, but it's also going to be happening. And if your hands need to be on a person to invite them to move in the way that you need them to move, then that's just what it's going to be. I mean, you guys have short roping in the guiding industry where you're very, very close, and we have a similar thing in steep skiing where you can stand just below somebody and put a hand on the downhill foot, and then that gives them a sense of security and connection to the ground. And then, the movement and the action can happen, and you can get them through stuff pretty much. Well, yeah.
Yeah. Some situations I could think of in the mountain guiding world, that could happen, is, somebody's out on a snow bridge, over a cliff, like a snow mushroom. And the more you freak out, the more they're going to move quickly and freak out, and the more likely it's going to go poorly. But if you kind of just say, hey, if you could just come over here, or just stay there, I'll just be right there, kind of thing. Or, you realize your client is in a climbing situation, is not attached to the rope, for some reason, right? You just realize, oh no, okay, we're not in a good situation here. Let's not freak out, because they're going to freak out. And now everybody's freaking out. So when it comes to coaching our friends or family or paying clients through these higher risk situations, what are some of the common mistakes that we can end up making?
Well, one of them, I think you just said, is just, freaking out, like getting emotional, letting like often if you're in a high risk situation, your emotions are running high, because you're recognizing the consequence and fearful of it. Which is fine. It's pretty normal. But if somebody in the situation can remove that and keep a bit of an even keel, that can go a long way towards success. Not letting those emotional responses color your responses to the situation. Especially, I mean, it's the oldest like adage in the book is you don't teach your significant other. If you're putting your boyfriend or girlfriend into some rowdy situation, and then they don't like it, and then they start dropping a bunch of maybe some insults because of the scenario, you got to just rise above that in the moment, and you can take it later and be like, did you call me that? But in the moment, you got to separate from that relationship and recognize that you're now in a position of kind of something being required of you, and you still have to be able to deliver that. So yeah, I mean, fear is a funny and complicated monster, and the closer the relationship that you have with somebody who is afraid, the more likely that emotion is going to get tangled up in it, and that gets messy so fast, like so fast. So I think if you can just keep on breathing, and make sure that everybody understands that we're all in this for the same reason, and then really resisting the urge to use those kinds of scenarios to show other people how awesome you are. Like sandbagging, just as a general thing, is just the absolute worst. Like, it never works out the way you think it's going to, and the person is not ever going to enjoy it and be like, wow, you are cool. Like,
Yeah, because you're out front, you skip across a piece of terrain like it's nothing, and then you're looking back and you're like, oh no,
yeah,
I could do this, and I wanted to do this, but they can't do this. I'm pretty confident they're not going to get this, and you're in a short roping situation or rock climbing or glacier travel, maybe you do have a rope tether, but a lot of these situations in the mountains we don't, right? Or surfing, right? It's like,
oh
okay,
yeah,
there they go.
yeah,
And you may have led to putting them into that situation because you wanted to do that. You wanted to ride that wave. You wanted to ski that slope. And then you're like, oh no, this is way beyond their
yeah.
capacity, and they're into it, and you fingers crossed, toes crossed, everything's crossed at that point because you have no other recourse.
Yeah, either you wanted to do it or you wanted them to see you do it. Yeah, and either of them are just as poor as reasons to lock into something.
You've been in the ski movies, and I've been in the background of ski movies, doing safety work, and it's incredible the athletes how they'll do like 10 days of playing ping pong, waiting for the right weather, and then all of a sudden it's on, like they're getting out of a helicopter and launching into the terrain, and people I don't think fully respect how difficult that is to do, to just turn it on and do a good job of it. It's really quite amazing. And so for people, they're heading down the slope, and now I've done my job. Like, I'm pretty sure there isn't going to be an avalanche, and because they're skiing something so steep that is avalanches so regular, that there's not going to be an avalanche of consequence. And now it's like it's all on them, and you're just giving them their wings and recognizing that they have skills and they've progressed up to where they are, and that can be at any stage of athleticism. Just the very, Nancy Green Ski League starting out, like that's their Everest, is
Yeah,
just trying to get their skis or their snowboard going the right direction. That's a big deal to them. And if you coached them and worked with them to that through a progression, then you can say, yeah, you got this, and off you go. But if you haven't, and you've pushed them into that and put them in that scenario, now it's all on you, but they're the ones who are going to get hurt.
yeah. They pay for your bad decision.
So do you have an example of a time when you made one of these mistakes or saw someone else fall into one of these traps?
Well, yeah, there was a guy that I used to work with as a client, um, who would sometimes have his own guests into our space, and he would use it as a like opportunity to talk business, and I would kind of take a background. I would just put us here or there, but yeah, there was one specific time where he had a guest within our day, and uh, he sold his guest's skills to me on a slightly false bill of sale. And I didn't, I was pretty young at the time, and I didn't do my due diligence to confirm. And it was one of these times where we hadn't had snow in a while, so the steeps were nice. It was chalky and enjoyable skiing, but not a lot of margin for error. Like, if you did end up laying on your side, you were accelerating quickly. And we ran into this guy at the bottom of the peak chair. I kind of asked, he was like, oh yeah, he's a super solid double black skier, like absolutely no problem. He can go anywhere I can go. So we went to West Bowl, and he blew the first turn. This is my client's guest, and slid like for a minute. You know, and I'm watching at the top being like, oh, that's my fault. Like I didn't vet this guy at all. And now he ended up dislocating his shoulder. So our contact was really brief, but the outcome was pretty serious. You know, this guy's very, very short contact with me resulted in him having like a real injury. And I should have never let go of the reins there in that sense of like, a decision needs to be made here that is my decision, not a guess.
Yeah,
so that was
choosing in that case to probably instead, in hindsight, actually step up a bit to it. And let's go over here first.
Oh, totally.
And vet you, and then we'll move over here and then up to there.
Yeah.
Which you never would have gotten up to there.
No, absolutely not. And my guest, you know, I needed in that moment to remember, and this is where it gets a little funny with like, you know, privates. I'm still in charge, especially in that terrain. You know, if you're doing a private lesson and you're skiing around on green runs, then the scope of what can go wrong is smaller. But bringing somebody else whose decision-making skill set is not equipped to make those decisions into the decisions, again, is my fault. And I let that weird dynamic kind of sway me into a decision that I knew better. And I knew it immediately. You know, as soon as I watched the first turn, I was like, oh, I blew it. Like this is going sideways and it's my fault. And it's his fault for insisting on this, but also like you got to stand up for yourself. At some point you're in charge, and that's just is what it is, especially in consequential terrain. So yeah, that was for sure a mistake, and you know, that guy paid for it.
Yeah. And then you feel badly, right? And it's reflective on your professional standing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely some lessons learned there. So when you're exposing someone to adversity like danger and it doesn't go well for them, how do you approach the person afterwards? So like in this situation, how did it go after that?
Well, he was in quite a lot of pain, and he was clearly a person who doesn't live in a place where pain is a regular occurrence. You know, if that makes sense. Like we spend time in the mountains, you fall over, you smash yourself, you know, whatever. It just exists in our lives.
The hurt just sort of revolves around.
Well, yeah, exactly. But it exists in our lives, and where there is a certain amount of just like exposure to it that you get used to it. Even just recognizing like I'm hurt or I'm injured. You know, that distinction. I spent a lot of time hurt, but not that much time injured. But like every time you fall off your bike, it hurts. But you're not always injured, but although it seems like often enough. Anyway, so this guy was, first of all, he was blown away that he was in all this pain, because he had never considered that there was consequence at all. Even though in you know, my eyes, I'm like, well, we were standing on the top of this big slope with hard snow. Like, of course that is lurking there. But he just had never once even considered that. So he was more than anything, like horrifically embarrassed. So ashamed and embarrassed that he had just done that in front of his like business associate and myself. So I'd say from like a personal or professional consequence standpoint, I kind of got away with it a little bit, because he wasn't mad at me for taking him there or allowing him. And this is where it gets weird, because it wasn't like I made him do it. I allowed his friend to make him do it. But ultimately the buck stops with me. but there was no sort of ill will towards me and my decision. He was just so embarrassed that he had done that in front of us. So yeah, but there's definitely other times where if you've taken the right steps and done the right progression and it still doesn't go right, you can stand tall in your decision making and go down and then deal with whatever it is you're dealing with. If it's an injury or it's just somebody that's a little sad, or maybe they're banged up but not actually injured, but you can go and have that discussion and go, oh, you didn't do what you said you were going to do. When we made our plan, the last part of the plan was that you would not touch the brakes for the last 2 meters, and you grabbed a handful of brakes, and lo and behold, you endoed onto your face. Okay, well, let's learn from that this is what happens when you don't execute. Anyway, so usually there's like a period of discussion, and then there can be some period of reflection of like, well, why did this not go right? Was it a bad decision, or was it just a poor execution? But yeah, I think.
And then we're going to do an episode in the future on liability, because some, that guest of your client, they could be inwardly focused and, feeling bad or embarrassed at the time, but then later it turns to kind of some sort of a backlash thing. And then essentially it can go legal on you. And what is your recourse there, right? In terms of your liability, negligence, and decision-making. Because people reserve the right to change their way of thinking as things progress for them. They're in the hospital and they're told they can't work for a period of time. Well, now that changes their perspective big time, from what they had as a perspective sitting on the slope at the base of the initial fall zone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So thanks. This has been super, super helpful, I think, for us and our listeners. You got a wealth of experience, and thanks for sharing your experiences, because it's not always easy for us as professionals to do that.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it. Thanks for the time and a great chat.
Chris, it was great having Derek on the show. He has a wealth of coaching and instructing experience, and he was very willing to share his experiences and lessons learned. What stood out to you? What does it take to coach people through danger?
Great question, Jordy. There's a number of things. Let's start with preparation. So preparing people before they are put in a high-risk situation, regardless of whether it is perceived or real, is key. It's very difficult to teach someone how to handle high-risk situations in high-risk situations. The skills needed to perform in the face of danger have to be learned and practiced where people can make mistakes with low consequences. Next up is letting people talk, as Derek highlighted. This can allow you to learn what their goals, fears, and weaknesses are. It can give a coach an opportunity to find out what learning strategies are working and what information has been absorbed. Another important consideration is building trust. Letting people talk, showing people that you care, and helping people to succeed are key components of building trust. When people trust their coach, they are more likely to believe in themselves. Conversely, when their coach believes in them, they are more likely to stay with their coach. Another point is to give people control where you can. A coach can do this by letting people talk themselves into or out of situations as much as possible. It's almost always better to let people come to the right conclusion on their own. What a coach wants to avoid is talking someone into doing something when they don't feel ready, and then having that person fail. When this happens, the failure is going to be on the coach. This will erode trust and damage relationships. At the same time, if someone isn't ready to do something, a coach may have to intervene and tell that person no. This is where building trust becomes important. Jordy, what stood out to you?
Chris, those are excellent points, and it was great to have his perspective on the show. First off, the idea of staying calm. So the more calm you are, the more calm other people are around you. But no one has ever calmed down by being told to calm down. If a coach shows sign of stress or lack of confidence, the people they are coaching are likely to follow suit. Using a reassuring tone, positive language, and keeping people focused on believing success is possible are key elements of creating a calm atmosphere. Secondly, keeping people close to you. When danger and stress levels increase, bringing people closer to the coach when it's safe can help to reassure people. It can also help to show people what they need to do to succeed. The more complex the situation is, the simpler we need our instructions to be. When people are faced with high-risk situations, feedback needs to be simple, relatable, and familiar. Now is not the time for complex explanations or new skills. And third, Chris, beware of emotion. When people are stressed, it is common for them to lash out. This is especially true when you know each other well. As much as possible, try to stay focused on what needs to happen and avoid taking things personally should things get heated. This brings us to the end of another episode of Delivering Adventure. If you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to rate and review it. Thanks for listening.